Galera, seguindo com a nossa programação, agora o nosso próximo momento é sobre o tema blockchain para o bem. Na verdade, seria um aquário, mas a gente repensou um pouquinho o formato e a gente vai fazer um painel auto-organizado aqui. É bom lembrar que o painel, a maioria dos palestrantes vão estar falando em inglês, então quem quiser pegar o fone de tradução, é só ir ali atrás. E antes da gente começar, eu só queria pedir para a gente fazer um pequeno exercício, para a gente ter atenção plena. Está aqui todo mundo de corpo presente. Então eu queria pedir para todo mundo levantar um pouquinho. Dar uma bela esticada, levantar os braços. Dar uma girada no pescoço, aquela alongada. E dar uma respirada profunda, respirar bem fundo. Pronto, agora está todo mundo aqui presente, podem sentar, vamos começar. Antes de eu chamar os convidados, só fazendo um breve resumo do que a gente vai falar, todo mundo sabe que blockchain é a nova tecnologia queridinha do momento. É a tecnologia que tem várias oportunidades para desenvolver, mas como qualquer tecnologia, ela é uma ferramenta. E ela pode ser usada tanto para o bem quanto para o mal. Ela pode ser usada tanto para descentralizar e gerar mais igualdade, quanto também para gerar mais centralização de poder ou então especulação de capital. Então, nesse painel, a gente vai debater um pouquinho e explorar quais são as formas que a gente pode usar o blockchain para o bem da nossa sociedade e para o bem-estar. Então, eu gostaria de, primeiramente, convidar para o nosso painel Andrea Bauer, que é autora do livro The Crypto Economy. Percival Lucena, que é cientista de computação que atua como pesquisador do laboratório da IBM Brasil. Vitor Maia, que é desenvolvedor da Ethereum Foundation. E Santiago Siri, que é fundador da Democracy Earth Foundation. Muito obrigado, o palco é de vocês.
So how can I get started? Okay, this is mostly an open format, so let's try to find a common point where we can start. We don't know each other very well now, but I think we have a common goal here, that is to discuss how blockchain technology can be used for the social good, the different use about how we can make democratic institutions or it can centralize power. I can start talking about my experience and maybe you can complement and go ahead and the discussion will flow, hopefully. Okay, so let me try to introduce a little bit about my work. As a computer scientist here in Brazil, we are part of an open source project from Linux Foundation, that's the Hyperledger project. That basically is an open source blockchain that allows anyone to create their own blockchain network for a specific purpose. So it's an alternative to a centralized blockchain like you have on Bitcoin, that basically people create their own blockchains for different reasons. So there are different initiatives. There are something like the identity network that can be used to allow the citizens and the people to have control of their own identity on how it is used among the governments, about the banks, about the institutions. So basically you don't have anymore the power centralized in single institutions, because nowadays, for instance, I'm a Brazilian citizen. I'm allowed to visit some countries, I'm allowed to work only here, and I don't have control of whoever accesses my information and how it's used. So we have a project that basically, the distributed identity allows people to have more control about how the institutions use their identity and how you share your personal information among companies. I think this is a blockchain used for the good because it's basically taking the power that is now centralized and giving the power back to the people. Another use case we have here in Brazil is We Light project that presented here in another session yesterday that basically created a separate blockchain to track donations for NGOs. So now it's not clear for people who donate to a specific NGO on how their donation is going to be used and what will be the impact of that. So people sometimes hesitate to participate on that because they believe that there won't be any result of their donation. So I think that blockchain helps to increase the transparency of several processes that really help create new business models that are good for the society. You probably know different ways that blockchain might be used for the good or for the bad. So basically, I think here our proposal is basically to discuss that. So what you guys, is your impression of basically on the use cases you know and based on the ideas you know? What's your impression that how blockchain is being today for the good and the bad in different scenarios?
Thank you. Yeah, hello, my name is Andrea Bauer, and since I'm here regarding this book that I wrote, The Crypto Economy, I give a little background information how this book actually evolved. So, as you all remember, 2013, Edward Snowden were relieving the NSA files, and since I was working for a very long time as a consultant on projects in technology, it was a kind of shock for, I think, many people in the technology area, in the digital ecosystem, startup world. And based on this, I started with a friend a panel discussion series where we discussed more on a meta level what is digitalization doing to our society. Because when you all remember back, to the internet in the beginning, we had a lot of very positive narratives around the internet. In the end, that it's democratizing, that there is the long tail, so many people can have independent businesses based on the internet. But what we got in the end, what we found out 2013 was that the internet was a mass surveillance system, a global one, content which is mainly based and organized around an ad-funded business model, and monopolies, which are kind of economic monopoly like Facebook, like Google. So there is not much of a long tail left, or when we look at the organization that got created. So in the end, in these panel discussions, we kind of looked a little bit deeper in, so what is actually there? What do we have? And we looked into mass surveillance, we looked into money, we looked into activism, and how it actually changed our behavior socially, with our economics. And since everything was on tape, so it was online, but as you also know, the attention span of people also gets very much reduced in the digital age, so 20 minutes max was what the people were looking, but the discussions were of course much longer. So I decided to write that down and bring it into a book. And by going over the whole content, I thought the crypto economy is a good term. It's not just because we are solely talking about blockchain or crypto currencies, but about many so-called exponential technologies. But in the end, what I thought, it's actually a little bit the metaphor. It's like I related it to the kryptonite also from Superman, as most of you know. And actually, when you remember, kryptonite is actually something that empowers Superman, gives you superpowers, and I think it's undeniable that digital technologies and also blockchain, cryptocurrencies has the potential to have a new form of democracy, has a new form of how we, track power, have built feedback systems. But it also, and I think this is a little bit my urge that I want to discuss, is that it can also catapult us in an absolute dystopia, in a form of a totalitarian system, and also in a governance with this then a hidden one. So it's today we have political institutions, a White House, where we can point to and can say, okay, this is where the power sits. In an algorithmic world, and we're already living in one, but this is a more extreme situation, we will definitely have a hidden power structure, and I think this is a little bit the thing that I want to talk about.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Victor Maia, I'm from Ethereum. Okay, sorry, can you hear me now? So before anything, my English is pretty bad, so if it's not clear and you can't understand it, please let me know, so I will speak in Portuguese, and then I guess they will translate it for you, so just let me know. I'm actually, honestly, not very good with those kinds of discussions of if blockchains are bad, if blockchains are good. I'm a very technical person, so I'm very focused on what can work, what makes sense, what cannot be done. But I think those discussions are very important. So, for example, we have very good uses of blockchain that can, in my opinion, make the world a much better place. For example, we can have new forms of governments that are incorruptible, that are honest, that are just different from anything that we know. For example, there's something that I really like, which is called photarchy. I don't know how to pronounce that, photarchy. But it's kind of like a new form of economy and politics that is very similar to communism and socialism in the way that it makes the people have control over everything. But it's also different because it actually understands the game theoretical preoccupations that makes an economic system work or not. In my opinion, one of the highest problems with communism is the fact that it kind of assumes that people are good, that people are fair, and people are not. People act on their own interests. And if you want something that gives the people power to control the nation, the economy, to have the richness of the economy to be shared by everyone, we cannot just like make a system where we give money to everyone and hope that works. That's not how game theory works, that's not how the world works. So photarchy is kind of like a system that has the same goal of communism, but has a lot of actual game theoretical research done to make it work. So for example, people vote on what they want the country to be. For example, I can vote not in someone that will represent me, but I can vote. I want people not to be poor. I want to have a good health system. I want people of all races to be the same according to the law. So people vote on what they believe. And then we use prediction markets and other things to make kind of like it work.
It's like fluid democracy or something?
Actual fluid democracy is something that's also very cool, and it kind of solves one problem of democracy, problems of participation, problems of bridging. But no, photarchy is actually something, because liquid democracy is more like, let's make a better system to choose people to represent us. No, photarchy is more like, instead of voting on people, let's vote on beliefs. Let's vote in just literally what you want the country to be.
Yeah, I think Andrea points that in your book as well, that the election system hasn't improved didn't catch up with all the technology like it wasn't before. We do elections in 4 years, like in Thomas Jefferson time, and now we have the tools to do democracy in a more grained level. We don't need to have that structure that was basically on the way that people could express themselves in the past. So what do you think that blockchain could help us catch up with the digital divisions? Anyone has any thoughts?
So, okay, this is loud. I'm as a Superman nerd, the kryptonite analogy, I thought it's perfect. And I think that the interesting question is, let's dissect actual power in blockchains right now. We can do that because of the level of transparency that the network entails actually visibilizes facts about how Bitcoin is being governed. And we all got into this technology because of the promise, and myself as an Argentine, I can absolutely guarantee this, of censorship resistance. This is a network that the transactions that we get to make, monetary or any kind, are resistant to any kind of censorship because there's no single entity controlling the network. There's no 51% party that gets to dictate how the network behaves. That's the promise. Let's move forward to 2017 and look at the network right now. And what we find out is that there are, in fact, a centralization happening in the hardware side of things and a centralization happening on the software side of things. In the hardware side of things, on Bitcoin, you will find that one single hardware manufacturer is doing the ASIC miners, the application-specific integrated circuits that are mining Bitcoin anywhere in the world. And this is a company in in China called Bitmain. Bitmain does 70% of the ASIC miners. Bitmain has its own mining company. They mine something around 20% of the Bitcoin available, but they do provide the hardware to 70% of the miners. One point of centralization. On the software side of things, there is a handful of developers that actually contribute to the reference client, to the reference software being used by every node in the Bitcoin network, and that's Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin Core is a handful of, the whole list goes more than 100 developers, but actual commits, it's 5 developers. They have different perceptions of the world. They are very unique, each one of them, but the bottom line is that software has a centralization point. And some of these developers are actually employed by a Silicon Valley invested company called Blockstream, which is developing really cool technology, but nonetheless have a bias towards how Bitcoin should scale. And this is the biggest question on the Bitcoin economy as a whole. How the technology can scale from 4 or 5 transactions per second to potentially 2,000 if you compare it to credit cards, or tens of thousands if you compare it to the stock market. The other problem is store of value. How we ensure that the network still remains censorship resistant, so no government or no powerful actor can interfere with the network. And there's another element that is also worrisome in terms of what's going on with this economy, and it's the amount of energy that it requires. The Bitcoin economy, there have been many headlines in the last couple of weeks claiming that a single Bitcoin transaction is worth the energy of a household for a full week, and that the Bitcoin economy as a whole has the energy cost comparable to Ireland as a nation state. I think that this energy thing is extremely relevant because it's able to explain the nature of blockchains in a scientific metric, energy. And when you look into the history of currencies, energy is extremely relevant to their value. The story that the US dollar emancipated from gold, the gold standard in '71 with Nixon, is just half of the story. The other half of the story is that when Nixon broke with the gold standard, he went to Saudi Arabia and told the Arabs, look at Vietnam. If you don't want to have Vietnam here, you better do all your contracts of oil in US dollars. And the Saudis agreed. Since then, the dollar became the petrodollar. So it's not really fiat money. It went into a different kind of good. That is a good that is used for energy. So accounting energy is the name of the game for any currency that wants to become the world's currency. And the interesting thing about Bitcoin, since it's the most successful cryptocurrency still, is that it's giving us a very clear understanding down to the smallest fraction of how much energy we're consuming as a global society. So understanding this information is understanding the level of scale that this technology is bringing us to reach governance beyond nation states and governments. The interesting thing is also look at what are the resources mining Bitcoin. One of those resources is the waste that energy companies in China would generate because the cities are still underpopulated. Energy that would otherwise be wasteful is the one that is actually being used to mine Bitcoin. And in this way, some of the Chinese companies are willing to subsidize energy costs for the population. Still, we need to pay attention at what kind of technology is also being used to generate the hashing capacity. So let's pay attention to the centralization in hardware, let's pay attention to the centralization in software, and let's pay attention to how much energy it takes, because these are the next big quests to keep the protocol censorship resistant.
One of the points you made was about how centralized Bitcoin mining become today, because, like, for example, we had one of the points that you made is how centralized Bitcoin mining is, because, for example, we have a picture where I believe more than half of the hash power of the Bitcoin network was some guy sitting on the same place. So it's true that Bitcoin mining become very centralized those days. And in my opinion, this is not the vision of Satoshi, and this is not how it should be. So thinking in solutions of that problem is important, in my opinion. I think that one of the things that can help it is better mining algorithms. For example, we have Monero, which can be mined on CPUs, which is more accessible than ASICs, which is what Bitcoin uses. Ethereum is also a little bit better than Bitcoin in that sense because it uses GPUs, which are also more accessible to normal people. I think the main point, the main issue with that problem is how efficient normal people can be in converting energy into proof of work power. So I think a better mining algorithm could help, and I'd like to know what are the solutions that you have in mind for this problem.
I only wanted to just relate it to the topic of how actually a currency gets distributed and how extremely it is related to the power structure of a nation state in the end. And I would definitely add, that the acceptance of or the acceptance points, of a currency is a very initial one, and this is why we have today governance who who actually decides upon what is the national currency. And I think this is what I think it's interesting what you see these days, especially around the topic of ICOs. How many of you know ICOs, or the initial currency offer? It's in the end related to their, so it's just, that you offer your own, or that you are launching your own currency, your own cryptocurrency. Actually a little bit of Kickstarter without having an actual product yet, but more a white paper. But what we see, I think it's a very interesting, dynamic around this, because right now what we see is that it's really much, an atmosphere about greed and fear to be part of this kind of movement. And it's less about, an understanding of the value system actually, what a nation state, actually a culture builds up over a while, if this is Germany or this is Brazil or whatever nation state it is. this is like developing over a long amount of time. And I'm personally very much interested in the fact, how governance is kind of, translated into the blockchain. And what I see there, there are some problems actually we are having, or problems which are completely new. And the first one is regulation, for instance. So a lot of people argue, that the law, when you read it today, is also very complicated to read. But with the architecture of this kind of software, being decentralized, being autonomous, actually it's very, there's a huge question mark on reliability, on actually how really translate the value system. If you say the value system is represented today by a law, which is kind of also like grown over a long time, and actually represents also the democracy in theory in a good way. How can we make sure, in a decentralized, in a DAO, in a decentralized autonomous organization, that you regulate the code, because the code is decentralized, the creator cannot control it anymore, and the user cannot know it, actually, because we cannot expect that everyone is becoming a developer, which will definitely never happen, and we know that. And just want to raise this one, and maybe you can comment on that.
I can chime in. On the proof of work side of things, there's Bitcoin, which is the unit of accounting, the blockchain, which is the memory structure, and proof of work, which is the algorithm that is being used by the miners to generate the currency. And if we go from a proof of work that uses GPUs, NVIDIA has 70% of the market share of GPUs. If we go to a proof of work that uses CPUs, Intel has 70% of the market share of CPUs. So there's still centralization. It's not a trivial problem. The alternative to mining algorithms are proof of stake or delegated proof of stake. There's also proof of elapsed time and more experimental approaches that don't even use a blockchain per se, like I've heard about IOTA's Tangle. So these are new emergent ways that ultimately the Wild West is achieving with cryptography and these networks censorship resistance. But it's not trivial. Proof of work is particularly successful because it means that the miners really cannot afford doing anything else other than that algorithm all the time. So this year we actually saw, I would argue, state actors trying to control the protocol when we had a fork in Bitcoin with Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Cash is this new version of Bitcoin that spin off in August that puts more transactions on the chain, hence is more beneficial to the miners who benefit from transaction fees. So everything points that the authors of Bitcoin Cash, probably Professor Faustus, the fake Satoshi, Craig Wright, Yihan Wu, and the founder of Bitmain, and Roger Ver, another proponent of big blocks, they are all in the eastern side of the world. So it's probably a Chinese attempt. At the same time, there was a less discussed fork called Bitcoin Gold that actually uses GPU mining. That is a threat to Bitcoin Cash because it's the Americans saying, wait, we can mine with GPUs, and GPUs are 70% controlled by an American corporation, NVIDIA. So we do see attempts to control through the protocol. If it's not through bad propaganda, like the CEO of JP Morgan trashing Bitcoin, it's through these attempts of forking the code and pumps and dumps and the whole altcoin craze. I still think that the Wild West that we are chasing here is this guarantee that will keep the network decentralized and censorship resistant. Whoever is best at achieving that and increasing utility and store of value as main functions will have the larger vote of the computers and the humans.
One of the assumptions is that to make the network censorship free, you basically needed the anonymity, and for the price you pay for that is having a very expensive proof of work protocol that requires a lot of electricity and has a cost to operate a centralized blockchain. So one of the discussions we have is basically about other consensus ways to keep blockchain working. So although very controversial, the proof of identity basically makes a blockchain operation much more cheaper and efficient. Basically on a proof of identity network like Hyperledger, you can have a throughput of something like 1,000 transactions per second, which is a very high throughput that no other blockchain can have. But in the other hand, you have the problem that someone is controlling the identities that for the people to operate in the side of the blockchain. And that basically raises the question of what's the advantages and what are the disadvantages of this anonymity. Because for some things it empowers people, but for some other cases it really is a weakness, because people from poor countries have less opportunity in anonymized blockchain than if they could use their identity to make global transactions. So we basically don't assume that anonymity that you have on a public blockchain network is good for everyone. It helps people be free from censorship, but on the other hand, limits the trust that people have in each other running this network. So do you have any opinion about what's the price that you pay? It's not just economic price that you pay on keeping the public Bitcoin blockchain, but what is the political price and what is the social price that you pay for this anonymity that you have on open blockchain networks?
I would more comment on the social price. And on the anonymity, I just give it then over to you. But it's what I really think it's interesting, about the discourse around blockchain is that it's becoming, I think, more politicized than any other technology. What I see, in terms of political terms around the technology, we have a smart contract. It kind of implies that it's very intelligent. We have the trustless system, which kind of implies that it's kind of a friend of ours. And many other terms, actually. Also, the decentralized autonomous organization, especially here right now in Brazil, like having the situation of the government. Of course, you wish nothing more than a decentralized autonomous organization where you kind of get the power back. But at the same time, when you just take the term of a trustless system, just if you look at the term, sociologically, and I think, we have a little bit to distinguish what does trust mean also in a social term. Because there's an interpersonal trust, so that really the real peer-to-peer trust, which is built up via a very long time, via a lot of activities, actions. And there is a system trust, like from Nicholas Luhmann, the system theory. He elaborated a lot around that. And with this, it's more a system trust towards a government. So you can have an organization as a trustful system, but you can also have an ATM as a trustful system. And right now, of course, we have, like in the banking area where the whole trouble started, why there's Bitcoin, why there's blockchain, a centralized organization. And this is why they say it's a trustless system. Doesn't mean that the trust regarding the system goes away. It just moves. It moves from the central organization into the algorithm. Doesn't mean that it needs to be trusted. It's just not more, it's more diluted, I would say. And I think, talking about the social, the social problem that we get with this, it's kind of, we get a hidden power structure with this. And I would also add that we are, because right now everyone reads the language, everyone speaks a certain language of a kind of a communal social gathering, but there we create a kind of a tech polis without knowing willingly, actually. Because I would rather guess, that just the conversation that we had here right now, that most of you couldn't follow 100%, which is completely fine, It's not everyone can be a developer, of course. There are other things to do in a society. But it's actually what we are creating, we are creating a tech polis who is kind of capable to read it. And even this tech polis needs to be ongoing a developer. Because I also know people, who just opting out for a year or two. Just look at GitHub. How many developing languages are popping up there? So you really need to get track. And then quantum computing also comes around. So now we're talking about machine readable, a human readable code, but machine code is of course so more and more, getting broader and broader.
Based on your idea, I think there's a discussion on who defines the rules of the smart contracts that are running on a specific blockchain. We are moving that power to corporations. Who decides what it would be a nice way or the right way to operate a blockchain in order we do not create the Skynet. So we are saying that we are going towards some democracy, but we are defining how things should work. So it's impossible to have the input of everyone and make a consensus about the rules. We basically have a consensus about the operation of the network once the rules are defined. So how do you think that's going to be the future of smart contracts in a way that they can be inclusive and they can be used to the good or they can use it to the evil? So what's your opinion about that?
So many thoughts gathered. I try to remember those first. Proof of identity, I think it's a very interesting problem to address. The problem with identity in computer space is that for computers, identity is just a pointer in memory. And we need to properly understand how we can actually identify human identity and differentiate it from bots or civils or replicants or duplicates or any kind of a human simulation that is really not connected to an individual or to a person in order to really build governance protocols for these kind of networks. So we need to understand how to use attention, not just computation. That's a very important resource. And every information theory problem is a problem of confusion, dealing with confused states. And this is particularly tricky because it's in these confused states, in these lags where you don't know what your right password is to access a system. If you have been hacked in that distance between your forgetting your password and actually fixing that problem, maybe someone has hacked you. This is how Wall Street operates. Wall Street tries to optimize their distance to the stock exchange, even in atomic distance. The real estate next to the stock exchange is extremely expensive, and it's all the hedge funds. They optimize on reducing the confused state. And this kind of thinking about how we build systems that can be trustable or trustless, which I think is one of the most interesting attributes of blockchains, is that the fact that maybe Bitcoin is the quantum computer, because dealing with confused states in quantum physics is what is the Schrödinger state. The exercise of the cat in the box, and you don't know if the cat is in the box dead or alive. That's a confused state. And in quantum reality, the way you have blocks being generated in the network and you have competing proofs until the particle collapses into one consensus about the events that happen in reality is the kind of perception that these kind of networks are breathing in once you dive really deep into the objective facts of this kind of technology. I think that we can run quantum simulations on the Bitcoin blockchain as we develop the technology to actually interpret how those simulations are run. But going back to governance and blockchain for good, definitely, the problem of deciding how we are governed or how we make decisions is the fundamental problem of democracy. We need to marry this kind of power that is really literally in the energy sense and in the economical sense with society in the best possible way, with bringing human attention not to Facebook, not to privatize ecosystems that are manipulating our democracies in a very drastic way, even to the point that the very owners of the network got played in their own land, but build this an open alternative with these networks that seem to ring closer to the ethos of the internet, bringing planetary governance possibility to our lifetime.
I'd like to add something to that. Talking about like blockchain, for coming back to the title, like what you just said, is it good? Is it bad? And I think, when we talk about it, what most of the time we talk about these days about blockchain regarding governance in any form, company, nation state, communities. We have to answer, how do we measure good? And most of our countries, they are measured in GDP. So if GDP is rising, we're doing good, right? Aren't we? Brazil? Is it doing good? Germany? It's what we measure, what we see is also, and this is when we say democracy is corrupted, is that we see actually that these mechanics, they are just, they're feeding into an elite, or they're letting an elite grow in the end. This is why we talk about liquid processes to kind of change if it goes in the wrong direction also. Or also bring a bigger, more intelligent on the table in the end. So I was wondering, how can we measure that we are doing good in the end? So, and I think, these are things that very hardly measurable in figures. So, because first of all, there are different regions. So I would rather say, someone here in Brazil is arguing about their health and what wealth is, or what I have a good life, is probably different like someone from Norway, just out of some environmental circumstances. So and I think this is also a little bit the question what I'm raising is, so how can we make the unmeasurable measurable? Quantum, yeah, but there's actually it's my and I think that we have only just one nation state in the whole world who is kind of having a happiness index as the goal, which is Bhutan, and this is how they measure if the nation state is doing good. But this is not a democracy; it's actually a kingdom.
Yes, and I think that goes back to the assumption that a single blockchain, one size fits all, can solve all the problems of the world. And basically, when we think about creating different blockchains for a specific purpose with different governance models, and giving people the choice on which kind of society or which kind of health system they want to operate, we basically have the choice and some degree of democracy than basically creating a blockchain to regulate some kind of industry that might be good for some people but not be good for others. People could judge in which blockchain offering, or which kind of blockchain for healthcare, or which kind of blockchain for the public good society could choose. Nowadays, they belong to a specific society based on their geographical location, and they have a few choices on what kind of system they want to participate. So basically, if we have think about blockchain not as a single entity, but about different blockchains built for specific purposes and built with specific governances, we could have more democratic way for people to integrate in this digital society. So that's basically the approach and the vision we have about creating blockchain solutions. So, but as everything, there is also the drawbacks, the negative points of that. So, in your opinion, what's the good points and what's the drawbacks of such approach?
I just want to make a quick note about what you just said. How do you measure how well is a country going? And I think that's actually a very good question, but that's kind of like how do we define what's good and what's evil? That's an actually very hard problem. Does not seem like it, but it's true, because when you have an economy automatized on the blockchain, how do you prove to the blockchain, how do you prove to the system what is good and what's bad to humans? That's actually one of the things that I think is also very cool about Futarchy. With that kind Futarchy. Futarchy, it's the communism with game theoretical research. Because how it works, you don't define what's good and you don't define what's bad. You just let people vote in indexes. So, for example, people vote, we want to maximize the index of alphabetization. People vote on, we want to maximize how productive our lands are, and things like that. People vote in index. We don't know if that's good or bad, but at least we give people the power to vote on what we want to maximize. And then we work on that. That makes sense?
Yeah, voting, absolutely, yeah. And I think this is definitely a tool that we are using, and which is completely, related to the narrative of democracy, of course. Yeah, sorry to argue again, but it's, with all the technologies we have, we cannot avoid the bias of human beings. There's laziness. There's a limited attention span. There is a synchronity on, intelligence to understand things, to vote in the end. So I think also, and I have the fear also a little bit, or I think probably it just will happen, that we are running into a kind of an attention economy with these technologies. Because there will be not just one blockchain. There might be many of your solutions even, and others are coming up with a different other form of blockchain. Or coming to the NGO solution that you developed from IBM. And with this, everyone will try to get as many attentions for their voters. But as we know, we only have 8 hours a day, and you all have to work, and you also want to spend some time with your friends and your family. So you will not have, you probably need to vote all day long, to kind of be part of this democracy. And I think, it's sorry to be the one who is just try to be realistic, and it's, this will not happen. And so the vote is definitely a good tool, I agree, but we will maybe have, and this is why we have today, every 4 years where people go voting, and even then not everyone is showing up. So it's just, and will you do it mandatory? Is this then totalitarian? I don't know. So it's, what I was just wanting to say is, let's just look at the technology, and let's understand what can the technology really do, and what can the technology definitely cannot do, and which we have the best intention, I know that, but we are, you can nothing do against the bias of human nature, and it starts with yourself, and just go through your routine every day.
I think that one of those problems is solved actually by a linked democracy, so we can combine those things. I think that's unacceptable, and you don't need to vote all day long. Linked democracy solves that problem. But I think you are kind of right It's not something that I can see happening in the short term, but it's actually something very cool to think about and to take inspiration from. So that's just it. I just wanted to talk about liquid democracy.
So, how are users behaving in crypto land these days? And what's the reality of those people that have fully migrated into full-on crypto? And you have to face decisions that are of a big responsibility, because there is a context of uncertainty and voices that will tell you it's a bubble and watch out. This happened in the 90s with another disruptive information technology that find the means to finance itself. And at the same time, it's such a fundamental transformation in what we understand as, how we understand currency or value or trust across digital networks, that is unprecedented. And I think that it gives rise, there's a quote that I like a lot from Naval, who's a very well-known angel investor in Silicon Valley, that he said that the weird thing about Bitcoin is that you can cross a frontier with technically billions of dollars just hidden in a passphrase in your mind. And that's protected, it's by many, many constitutional guarantees across many, many governments. The fact that we were able to put money into a big distributed computation and store it as an idea in our mind and cross frontiers is the kind of innovation that only heads of state or drug lords had in the past. And now it's becoming democratized. And it's democratizing these actions. Also ICOs. I think that ICOs, of course, there's a lot of scammers and we have to pay attention to the bullshit in the network, which is always a strategy. Trolls, bullshit, gossip. Those are noisy information that hijack good signaling. But the ability for anyone in a permissionless way to participate in the upside of funding technological research and successful products through the use of open source software, to me it's mind-blowing. And the fact that this way of financing has been incredibly successful with a handful of technologies already, mainly Bitcoin and Ethereum. And that a guy in Zimbabwe can invest in the same way than a guy in Silicon Valley into that same technology. That's democratizing access to finance, and that's why this technology has more chances to reaching those that have been excluded by the traditional systems because of the scalable nature of digital. We still need to push the boundaries farther away, but this is the history of every technological innovation. And these changes in paradigm, these changes in authority have happened in the last decade. Wikipedia, to me, is one of the most incredible examples on how we judge authoritative content as a global society. Wikipedia ranks #1 in most of the Google searches, and it's because it's bottom-up, peer-to-peer generated content that has become more authoritative than traditional academic knowledge. And even if you look into previous paradigm changes in information technology, a consequence of the printing press was encyclopedic illustration, which led to political revolutions of all colors. So we are getting that condensed process, historical process, in a much more faster, accelerated pace. We are condensing in a few decades what used to happen in a few centuries. So I think that we need to also understand that we need to adapt to these technologies, that every technology, depends, the goodwill or the bad will of it depends on the user. We need to be able to measure that. With our work we're doing at Democracy Earth, we measure two things: legitimacy in the process of decision making and how factual the decision process was regarding what led to the outcome of a decision. So fact and legitimacy matter to us, and we believe that that will lead to a better metric, hopefully, than GDP, that it's only about economic growth and borrowing from the future. It's a credit-based logic. You have to grow what you can borrow from the future. Bitcoin and Ether and all cryptocurrencies, I think, are a much more explicit manifestation of the future in the present, and give us a possibility of thinking even longer term than the funding mechanisms and the technologies of the past, which after the subprime crisis, not even the US dollar is a trusted way of saving money. So the opportunity, I think, is huge, and we'll see even more changes.
Yeah. Moving money with cryptocurrencies democratize part of the human needs, but it's only a part of the digital identity. So there are other mechanisms that existed before cryptocurrencies that allowed the rich people to move currency, their money to paradise, a fiscal paradise elsewhere in the world. So although it helps some people, like people who is living abroad, to send money back to their country without paying less taxes, that's a good use of cryptocurrencies. There are many people who live outside their countries and need to remittances money back to their countries, and now they can do that more easily. Those mechanisms were not so easily available or more expensive to those peoples. But I think the monetary assets is only a small part of the problem that is being solved. I think that's why we are investigating and we are studying the distributed identity on blockchain, because we think the problem is not only moving a monetary asset or a physical asset or a diamond from place A to place B using a cryptocurrency. It would be really much more impact to the people of the planet if they could move their credit score, they could move their education, diplomas, they could have some way of representing their digital assets in a way that makes sense for them than just moving money. When I move money from place A to place B, I might help some things, but it doesn't really democratize all the aspects of the life. So what's your opinion about that?
I just wanted to remind that this is a fishbowl. So you can come up, and I already saw a hand there. Do we have another microphone, actually?
I'll answer briefly there. I think reputation is extremely important. The key thing is also how you are able to generate an identity as a human right in a self-sovereign way, and get started from there to signal who you are in the network without relying on Big Brother. And that's a very tricky problem.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'm totally not an expert on this topic, but I found this a hugely interesting conversation, and I just wanted to throw in some questions that hopefully aren't too basic, but like just to poke a little bit. And just starting with the last comment that you made, I'm glad that you replied to it, because of course the distributed identity, where we give like ownership of the data back to the actual people, I think is a hugely important challenge that we're facing. And at the same time, when you speak about it, you know, the whole China's credit score system, which is the opposite effect of that, is the one thing that comes to mind immediately. So what you said is how to avoid exactly the exploitations of the system that we're building now for those purposes, I think is a huge risk. And I wanted just to comment briefly on what you said about creating equal opportunities. And I always feel a little bit like old and bitter when I listen to these kind of conversations, because I want to believe in this too. But what you said about the power of this technology, creating a more level playing field and unleashing all these opportunities for people who were not in power positions before, is really the exact same narrative that we had when the rise of like social media and internet became popular, and we said the exact same things about the empowering effect it would have them, which to a point it did, but it also has had the effect now of huge power concentration and centralization, all the media systems that we're seeing happening online today. And especially when it comes to, you know, that person in Zimbabwe being able to make the same transactions as a person who comes from where I come from, for instance, in theory that exists. But in practice it doesn't, because all the disparities and unfairnesses of how our societies are structured, how our financial systems work in very much today's reality, don't allow that to be a really equal playing field.
Yeah,
absolutely agree. Because also, you know, the thing is, and I think, you know, especially the financial crisis showed that when you ask people what is money, no one knows. Most of them don't know. And I think, and the best book that I can recommend on money and what money really is the book from David Graeber, who describes the last 1,000 years of the narrative of death in the end. And he describes very good how it is actually interconnected. The narrative of a nation state, how you come up with money to actually finance your soldiers on the outer skirts, to kind of give them a role. And with this, actually, he argues even, that artificially markets get created. And it's already all connected also that then these people need to pay taxes. And this is actually one circle, what is where money is not a medium, it's a method. And this will not change through blockchain in the end. Actually, through blockchain, we're going to see the very nature of money, what it really is. It is a control methodology. That's all. It will not make you rich. It just makes you run.
Yeah, I just like to make a point that we are actually talking about so many good things we can do with blockchains. And I think we are not talking a lot about all the bad things the real bad things that can be done. For example, we had drug markets, we had people like selling the action to kill other people on the deep web for bitcoins. And every time you see someone hacking someone on the internet, normally the person asks for Bitcoin. So can we actually live in a world where there is no government, where nobody can stop those things? I actually have an opinion on that, but I would like to hear some of your thoughts on this.
I can have a pencil and use this pencil to kill you. The pencil itself, it's not bad. It's used to write, but I can use that to kill you. So it's not about the technology itself, right? It's about how you use every illicit technology can be used for a bad purpose.
Yep.
I agree, that makes a lot of sense, but I think there is a difference of scale between like a pencil that you can use to kill someone and completely making governments obsolete, like a total anarchy where nobody controls anything. I actually kind of like this. I'm not sure, I'm not decided if this is a good thing or if this is cause the end of the world, but I think it's cool to think about this kind of world.
Yeah, the pencil example. I would also want to add that in the end, what's different in the digital era, actually, we have most of the time actually the situation that we say, hey, it's just a medium, right? It's blockchain. Hey, it's just the internet. Let's just try it out. It's just technology, so it can be good, it can be bad. But you have a legal system today which says if you have a knife, you can cook with it, but if you kill someone, you get into jail. Independent now what the system is, who is defining this, of course the system can be corrupted, of course we know all that. But I would now make the bridge to the digital world, to the tech world that we are in these days. There is nothing like we forbid something. Everything is allowed. It's the Wild Wild West. And this is why we use drones for bringing, like advertising drone technology to bring food to the African savannah, to some tribes, and at the same time we have drone strike. And on a global level, it's all okay. It's all fine. And this is why this argument is not working at all. It's actually in the technological world, and especially when we talk about global narratives, there is no one who kind of actually has the control to say this is okay, this is not okay. It's just happening. And it will be the same with blockchain if we cannot watch it. There is an...
Yeah, so I want to say a couple things. First, the argument about the pencil is the same argument that in the United States they use for saying why everyone should have guns that can kill a lot of people. Like when a gunman went and killed 500 or 50 people and shot 600 people in Las Vegas, the argument was the gun doesn't make you do it. Anyone can use a gun for any purpose. This person just happened to use it to shoot 500 people. So what we build and how we build it and how these technologies work, it matters. And my worry or concern about the blockchain is we have a number of us who are trying to figure out how to build a more just society on top of it. And then you have another set of people who want to just make a shit ton of money. And it's like, how do we use this innovative distributed technology that is really important and interesting, built on top of the people who just wanted to make a shit ton of money and not pay taxes? And I don't know, like, that's my worry and why I've been always like, I don't know if I want to, because the technology itself is fascinating, but like, it's meant to avoid taxes. And if we succeeded in avoiding taxes, then we would have societal collapse. Like, we don't have other institutions yet. And
I would argue that the narrative of what you just said is very interesting. It's actually, you know, if we avoid taxes, the narrative of the nation state would kind of break apart. And this is actually what ICOs are showing these days very good. Because just in the last weeks, actually, a lot of nation states, the ones that we know today, like China, the US, the European Union, made a position on it. And China completely banned it. But of course, they're working on their blockchain solution at the same time, but more on their governmental, arena. I love the reaction of Putin. He first said, warned about the danger of Bitcoin, and then announced the crypto ruble. And they're actually really arguing that it should be mandatory, or that it should become mandatory. And actually, this is totalitarianism on steroids.
I think that great to see that you're here, Ivan. Good friend. The question on taxes is super interesting. Another argument can be made in the sense that if you look into the financial dynamics intrinsic to Bitcoin or Ethereum, you are enforced to make a payment each time you make a transaction, and the transaction fee is a tax paid enforced to the miners who contribute to the security that sustain the trust in the network. We pay taxes to the government because the government puts the army that contributes to the security of the safeness, of the safety of our bodies. So the financial logic of blockchains have enforced payments for security, taxes. We are just paying those probably to the miners and the energy companies behind the miners. So we need to look at that bottom line. But I do see that these are the Bitcoin network or the Ethereum network. They are contexts that will compete with nation states because they have that kind of scale. Like the GDP of Bitcoin itself grew like $80 billion in the last year. That's, I don't know, probably a small country. I don't want to offend anyone. The other thing, the tax is, in this context, is how much money do you have in fiat money? Because that's the monopoly tax money of the government. So how much you actually translate to fiat, the bottom line, that's what you are being taxed and what you are willing to play under the rules of the government. That's also the other part of the fraction. So we need to look at it, I think, under a new lens, because these technologies won't ask for permission, will compete with nation states, and people will migrate their political and economical realities to these contexts because they feel probably safer, or they feel their assets are safer, or their identity is safer. So I think that it's food for thought, definitely.
Andrea, you talk about trust and what technology can do and can't do. And Santiago talked about scaling. I don't come from a tech world, so I don't fully understand blockchain, but what is the kind of leadership that blockchains needs behind it to go? I don't know.
Maybe I'm answering philosophically and you technically. So we could do it like this. I think this is also leadership. It's actually the interesting thing. First we said, you know, blockchain is actually not distributed but decentralized. With this, there are like knots in the net which can become bigger, and you can answer this technology, how much power these knots can have actually. This is one thing. So actually it's kind of, I would like, the narrative of a body in the end, especially also because also when you look at the body, it's also not the brain who is leading everything. And maybe you also saw the book, in the front from reorganizing, redefining organizations from Lalue. And I really like his argument, from that now we are probably also more advanced, as societies, as humans maybe also. We understand more and more that we are going away from these hierarchy organizations, or that we are kind of maybe now in a phase that we are stepping into a next level of consciousness. And with this, we understand maybe networks are more efficient. With this, we can gather and kind of decide on bigger problems, global problems. And and the organism in the end, there is not just one cell in the brain who leads everything. It's actually, you have many brains in your body. And I think also this is how blockchain should be. And, but still we have a problem of this regulation thing. So because right now, and most of the people think, then there's one king, there is one party, there is one president in the end, and if it doesn't work, we just elect a new one. But I think it becomes more and more clear, if it is here in Brazil, in the US, or anywhere else in the world, that it's always an apparatus in the end that we designed, and it's almost independent who is leading it. It's just like evolving over time. And after a certain time, it's just collapsing. And for this, for sure, blockchain is very, very interesting, because it's actually, you can build a kind of a decentralized knowledge base, but we need to get the algorithms right and not that restrictive, like an organism, which has also changed. Our DNA is changing in a second base. Whatever you experience, it's changing. And if it is a rigid technology, it will also fail.
Okay, so you're talking about how should we lead those blockchains, how should we govern those blockchains, and I don't think I have an answer to that question, but I think I have an answer to the question, how are we doing it today? Because some people don't realize, but blockchains actually have some kind of government system going on. And it's kind of, some people just don't see it, but it exists. So let me explain how the governance of blockchains work today. I'll give you an example. Ethereum was created and idealized by someone called Vitalik. Vitalik is someone that has a lot of influence on the community. If Vitalik says something, pretty much everyone will follow him. So some people say Ethereum is not truly decentralized because Vitalik kinda is the leader of Ethereum. Vitalik is kinda the king of Ethereum, and the god of Ethereum. And is that true? And the answer is no. Actually, Vitalik perhaps is the king, the leader of some of the community behind Ethereum. But something that happened on the last year, we had a big hack on a contract inside Ethereum called the DAO. And Vitalik and other people from the foundation said, okay, let's fork the network, and he writes the history to remove that hack. And Vitalik liked that idea and he supported that idea. So a lot of people supported it too. But some people said, no, we are not happy about that. We don't want you to rewrite the history. So what happened? Something we call hard fork. And the network is split in two, splitting those that want the hack to be, the history to be rewritten, and those that don't like. So now we have two versions of Ethereum, with the Ethereum and the Ethereum Classic. So how should blockchains be led? How should it be governed? I don't know. But how it is today is, if everyone agrees with how things should work, it is just consensus, it just works that way. If people don't agree, it's just splits. So it's kind of like some kind of government system that nobody made, nobody thought about it, but it's just how it is.
So, leadership. Who is the king of Bitcoin? Satoshi Nakamoto. Period. And nobody knows who the hell Satoshi Nakamoto is, which is the most interesting acid test for Bitcoin in terms of guaranteeing its level of privacy, which is not fully anonymous, but it has a great degree of at least covering the tracks of someone that, technically speaking, has $12 billion worth of Bitcoin. Satoshi has this 1.5 million minted coins, mined coins, that he has never moved. And he appeared as an artificial entity or identity. Nobody has been able to fully prove his humanity. I'm not denying that he's human. Well, maybe he's not. Artificial intelligence traveling through space-time. But I think that says a lot about the kind of leadership that we seek in blockchain space, in decentralized space. It's not about the king or the president anymore. It's this new kind of figure. And I think that the sovereign way, self-sovereign way of how you look for leadership is who you trust regarding their judgment, and you decide who to follow. And the interesting thing in Bitcoin, in Ethereum, in many of the cryptos, on social media, on Reddit, on Twitter, hopefully we'll get decentralized networks, but there is already this reputation economy going on, because it turns out that there's a lot of people migrating to this kind of networks for their survival. So, but Satoshi, I think, is the perfect example of what leadership means in crypto.
I see two hands. He has it a little bit. Okay.
Thank you. So I think you rightly say that a lot of the power is very concentrated in these platforms, similar to in current tech platforms. A lot of the wealth is also concentrated, and the founders and the early adopters, and in Bitcoin's case, people that used it for illicit means at the beginning and randomly bought a lot of the currency. But I want to specifically ask how you think you can help people at the bottom of the pyramid. For example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has started an initiative for cryptocurrencies for exactly this purpose. I think there's startups in Brazil as well that are creating cryptocurrencies in the favelas. And what your opinion was on the viability of using this technology to include people in the financial system that are currently not.
You mean like to bank the unbanked, kind of, or like? And I think this is actually the digital divine, I mean, of course, you can now equip everyone, with these technologies, but I think also this blockchain is kind of also bringing the biggest challenge on the table. First of all, we talked about scalability, kind of, can it perform like payment systems today? No, it can't. And I'm also, the Bill Gates Foundation is an interesting one, of course. There's big fat NGOs, but I don't, there's a lot of economical interest in it. I don't know this project what they established. Maybe you can describe it a little bit better. What do they do in the favelas with blockchain?
They created the underlying technology, similar to how Ethereum allows people to create ICOs for people to use cryptocurrencies in emerging markets. I don't know much more detail than that, really.
So they set up cryptocurrencies for local communities.
Yeah. I worked on a project that we presented to the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB in Washington, that was about blockchain in favelas, or in Argentina, we call them villas, in Buenos Aires. And there were many ideas. Obviously, financial inclusion is a big one. The unbanked, if we can bring financial inclusion with these technologies, I think they have better chances than the reputational practices of know your customer policy that have been pushed by banks. But beyond that, the project that we pitched them was figuring out a way of making birth certificates for newborns in these places where, hospitals, there's a lot of nasty things happening, like trafficking babies and corrupt officials. So we find technologies that can help people, make sure to generate some kind of birth certificate that it's, has the proof stored in a way that no one can challenge your fatherhood or motherhood to your child. That's an interesting application, but of course there are many challenges that have to be tackled in order to make feasible implementations of these technologies, because we are still figuring out a lot of the user experience and how we can simplify the cognitive workload required to actually interact with these networks. They are not easy yet to use. So there are many challenges there, and it's great that Bill Gates and Melinda Gates are pushing humanitarian work with this technology.
Regarding banking the unbanked, there were some initiatives here in Brazil. The first by Blockchain Center in São Paulo. It didn't involve blockchain the first phase, but it was basically a mobile application that works like a prepaid card that allows the unbanked people to receive money, and they could go to an ATM and receive that money from the ATM. So those people who wouldn't have a credit score, or there would be hard to know your customer because they don't have a job, so a formal job, so they couldn't open a bank account. So, but I think it all goes back to the identity problem, right? So there are people who are excluded from society and don't have the chance to access the formal ways. We are basically thinking about first having a global identity, but sometimes those people don't even have a local identity, so they are excluded from the formal economy. So yes, in that sense, blockchain can be used, and as a matter of fact, too. Like there are some ICOs there that allows people to do some borrow money for small enterprises, like a crowdfunding based on blockchain with smaller interest rates. So there has been lots of applications in small scale in Brazil and in other countries worldwide that might help you to go into that direction from banking the unbanked people of the world.
Something that you talked about is how Bitcoin and other coins give a lot of power to the early users. And that's actually something that I think is a real problem, because if you think about it, today on Bitcoin, we have a lot of early users with a lot of Bitcoins, a lot of power, and everyone else with fractions of a Bitcoin. So honestly, how is that different from what we have today? There's a lot of elitization going on Bitcoin right now. So I honestly think that the emission curve, the emission rate of Bitcoins is broken. I think Satoshi got the wrong curve there. And if you think about it, that's one of the reasons that Ethereum is growing so much that and the other year. Of course, it's a better technology, some would say, and it has better features and it's more complete. But if you be honest about it, many of the people that are on Ethereum right now is those guys that lost the opportunity to be early users of Bitcoin. So I kind of think that any coin, any blockchain that uses that curve that Bitcoin uses is doomed to eventually become elitized, and people will just go to some other coin. So I actually think that the way Bitcoin works is not correct in that sense.
And I think Bitcoin is the only currency we have today, cryptocurrency today, who actually has the capacity to could go mainstream. The others, they are not in this state these days. But I only wanted to add, to the Bill Gates Foundation setting up cryptocurrencies in the favela. I think it's an interesting situation, because today, when you look at money, it only can be issued by nation state. if you are issuing your own money, you can do this. There are many examples throughout history where people tried, in little communities, if it is a favela or it is just a little village, it's independent, they tried it, to kind of, build their own system. But after a certain time, if it really, become bigger, the nation state comes around to the police and says, stop it. So it's an interesting situation that the Bill Gates Foundation can do such a thing, first of all. You don't, you're guessing. I see, okay. I only know that there's, can we take a final question?
So 2 weeks ago, blockchain was named and inserted into the current official climate negotiations. It was submitted by 2 big groups of countries as the main platform where the exchange of what they call mitigation outcomes will be among the countries. No? But the actors behind that are besides all the big financial players, it's World Bank, there's people from UNCTAD and WTO. Our main issue is that the whole logic of the transforming carbon in the currency connecting to as index of energy runs on a logic of the least cost. The least cost means that the territories, the land in the south, are going to be issuing those mitigation values. So our problem, and I would like to pose this to you, and everybody's now in the climate is fascinated with the blockchain. It's not how, but is that we are in the historical moment where we are creating, commodifying carbon and transforming carbon in a private property. And this has devastating impacts in land grabbing, in expropriating people and traditional ways of managing land, especially in the Amazon. So I would like to hear more about that, because this year is next year by December 2019, 18, they have to close the rule book of the Paris Agreement, and blockchain is the big thing.
I think that goes back to my point that the problem is not with technology. It's about the governance model. Who are the people who are writing the smart contracts? Who are the people who define the unfair rule of the smaller price being the right way to pay back the carbon credits for that? Every blockchain network we create, people should be aware of the governance model of that network. And sometimes people don't have the choice to decide what kind of network or what kind of blockchain network they're gonna use. In the community, we have this culture of fork, of creating an alternative system when such thing happens. So if everyone agrees that the rule for carbon credits is unfair, and we have all those players defending that rule, and they created a network that would operate in this model, there can be another person like you with a different mindset and propose an alternative. It's not like we have a global blockchain and this would be the only carbon blockchain network. Of course, those powerful players will defend their network instead of your ideas. And we go back to the power model that we currently have in this world. So blockchain doesn't really help to go against or to have a different power structure. What do you think?
Super interesting question. First, what seems to be happening between Ethereum and Bitcoin is that they reward different behaviors, and in their economic dynamic, Bitcoin putting a cap on 21 million coins and halving every 4 years rewards probably something closer related to store of value, whereas Ethereum fostering smart contracts and increasing the utility of the tokens are more geared towards increasing, valuing utility rather than store of value. And we get to choose, we as free members of the internet and in living beings of this planet, what ideological configuration satisfies our view of the world. I'm a member in a council that works with the World Economic Forum on natural resource security and environment. And the main topic of conversation this year in Dubai was energy and blockchains, and what is really going on within the connection of the two. I do believe that when you look into what's generating this excessive use of energy, there's this algorithm called proof of work. And proof of work really rewards whoever is able to come with the cheapest hardware and the cheapest energy for all it cares. That's the competition that sets. The outcome of that experiment has been that 70% of the mining capacity is in China. The reason behind it, I would argue, there are many, but one of the main ones is that China has exponential demographic growth. So they build cities, a lot of cities super fast, and most of these cities are underpopulated. So they have energy companies that generate a surplus that is still not satisfied by the demand, so they have a huge amount of waste of energy being generated, probably from fossil fuels. But this waste is being used to mine. Energy companies are using Bitcoin as a battery, so what would be waste at least generates some ability to negotiate energy on blockchain-based networks. So there are many ways of looking at this. Some people would even argue that Bitcoin is a Trojan horse in Chinese territory, hijacking energy infrastructure. But it has a lot of implications for sure. Governments are threatening it and then releasing, and then threatening it again. The Chinese government has systematically gone against and in favor and against and in favor of Bitcoin. And if you look closely into the language they use, it's like more broad and semantically than just banning the coin. So they are kind of playing an ambiguous game in order to understand what's their probably stake on this kind of technology, or if they will invest on competing technologies. I think we are already seeing geopolitical influence in blockchain-based networks on a very big scale. What happened recently with Bitcoin Cash and all this bull run has to do with that, to control the protocol. But I think that the question around energy is extremely relevant. And it's not just the blockchain, it's also Bitcoin, which means the incentive around the economy itself, or Ether in the case of Ethereum, and also the mining algorithm that, in this case, in the case of Bitcoin and Ethereum, still is proof of work.
And I would add that I think this example shows just perfectly that the blockchain is just another medium or technology where we should not forget that we are still in a geopolitical context. And the moment when blockchain kind of, were announced, the one where putting most of the money in were the governments and were the banks. And I think this is not what we just should forget. And they have a major interest to not make it decentralized and kind of, to ensure their power system, of course.
The end. Thanks.
Ei, 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 ei. Ei, 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 ei. Ei, som 2, 2, 2, 2. Som. Ei. Mas é porque se o cara falar assim, o problema é quando ele fala assim, ó. Entendeu? O problema é